Got it. Very cool. So just to kind of tie this all together, Salesforce is kind of the hub. Phone information passed through, email information passed through, DocuSign sends, anything that works with Salesforce and it applies to the objects on Salesforce. Ambition is picking up and showing to the minute detail all that stuff in real time as you've designed it here, which is kind of what I wanted to shift gears into is like, let's talk about how you built these metrics. You know these better than me, but like we could look at apps out, we could look at any of this stuff. But I'd love for you to take us behind the curtains here and talk about the setup. I think one thing that you did really well and that other folks ask us a lot, I'd love to talk through, is like, how does this stuff actually work? Like, let's go behind the curtains. Everyone says, hey, our app works with all your data. You got 4 or 5 systems plugging into Salesforce here, and I think things work pretty easily, but let's take a look and talk to it from your perspective.
Sure. That was one of the things that was very important for us initially to understand was how Ambition pulls that data and how to best make that data available. And for a lot of our metrics that we had built out, that data didn't exist prior to Ambition, and it was something that we just assumed that was not possible to report on until we found that we could. We just had to figure out how.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of these things, so let me just pull up, I think calls inbound is probably a good one to take a look at.
Okay.
So now this is a metric, obviously it's being powered through New Voice Media and it's coming into Salesforce, and that's where the data is kept. The biggest thing I think that for us to understand when it comes to building a metric was that any metric that's going to be pulling from Salesforce needs 2 things. It needs a date and time, and it needs a user, because the user is who's going to be assigned credit, and then the date time is, that's the trigger time of how it knows that action happened. So in this case, you can see it's an inbound call. It's coming off the task record. In this case, in New Voice Media, when you make a phone call or receive a phone call, everything becomes a task or activity record. So in this case, it's a task record. It's going to have all the information for that call on that task record as well. So here we can see that the owner of that task record is going to be the user in Salesforce that had made that call. So in this case, we're going to assign that call to the owner of that task record, which is going to be the person who made the call. And then the create date on that task is going to be the start of that call. So we're going to use the start time on that phone call in order to tie in the calls. So now this is not a time metric. This is just a call unit. We do have a call time metric that is separate. So in this case, we're just doing a count. So we just want to count how many calls that we had. And now on this, it's very important that we only want inbound. We don't want everything. We don't want outbound. We just want inbound. So in this case, we'd have to put in some filters. So the base filter that's usually on everything is the is deleted, just to make sure that if we ever go back in there and remove something, that it's taken care of. But on here, we want to both make sure that it was in fact a call. So in here, we're just going to put in there that a call duration is greater than 0. So that's just telling us that it was a call. It wasn't anything that could have been something else and someone manually put in the task. And then on here, a call type equals inbound. We have options here to be inbound or outbound.
And Ambition pulls all your predefined dispositions, right?
Correct.
Got it.
So it pulled in right from that record, roll the options from that record. So in this case, we can actually take a look and say, all right, well, according to filter logic, anything that meets all of these 3 criteria, it'll increment that count for that owner for that date whenever the new task is entered for that. And that's how we capture the inbound calls. We do the same thing for outbound, obviously, with a different filter. We also have one that we had broken out for dial lists in particular, because New Voice Media gives us the option of having on the task record, it'll actually have a dial list field so that we know that it came off a dial list, so we can say how many outbound calls a rep had made, how many inbound calls they made, and of the outbound calls, how many of those outbound calls were a dialer. And then the nice thing is in Ambition, we have the ability to have an advanced metric where we can actually go in there and say, all right, now that I know that I have inbound and outbound calls, I also want the total of calls. I can either make another metric in Salesforce to pull it, but in here I can just simply go into and make an advanced metric that's going to be the sum of all the calls. And it basically just takes one metric, which is the calls inbound, adds it to the calls outbound, and from that, you get the calls total.